Hello, hello. Welcome to another story time. It's been some time, but we are here to do some Chinese myths and folk tales. So grab your blankies, grab your snackies, because it's time for a quickie, a story time quickie. Today's tale is Miss Chiao-no. I really hope I pronounced that right. Again, I'm trying my best with some of these places and people. So like if I do mispronounce some of this, please don't be mad at me. Okay. Miss Xiao-no. Oh man. Kung Xiu Lin. I don't even know how to say that. Kung Xiu Li was a descendant of Confucius. He was a man of considerable ability and an excellent poet, a fellow student to whom he was much attached, became magistrate at Tiantai, and sent for Kung to join him. Unfortunately, just before Kung arrived, his friend died, and found himself without the means of returning home. So he looked up his abode in a Buddhist monastery, where he was employed in transcribing for the priests. Several hundred paces to the west of the monastery, there was a house belonging to a Mr. Shan, a gentleman who had known better days, but who had spent all of his money in a heavy lawsuit, and then, as his family was a small one, had gone away to live in a country and left his house vacant. One day there was a heavy fall of snow which kept visitors away from the monastery, and Kong, finding it dull, went out. As he was passing by the door of the house above mentioned, the young man of very elegant appearance came forth, who, the moment he saw Kyung, ran up to him and with a bow entered into a conversation asking him to be pleased to walk in. Kyung was much taken with the young man and followed him inside. The rooms were not particularly large, but adorned throughout with embroidered curtains, and from the walls hung scrolls of drawings by celebrated masters. On the table lay a book, the title of which was Jottings from Paradise, and turning over its leaves, Kyung found therein many strange things. He did not ask the young man his name, presuming that as he lived in the family mansion, he was necessarily the owner of the place. The young man, however, inquired what he was doing in that part of the country and expressed great sympathy with his misfortune, recommending him to set about taking pupils. Alas, said Kyung, who will play the Macenas to a distressed wayfarer like myself? If, replied the young man, you would condescend so far, I, for my part, would gladly seek instruction at your hand. Kyung was much gratified at this, but said he dared not arrogate to himself a position of teacher, and begged merely to be considered as the young man's friend. He then asked him why the house had been shut up for so long, to which the young man replied, This is the Shan family mansion. It has been closed all this time because of the owner's removal into the country. My surname is Huang Fu, and my home is in Shenxi. But as our house has been burnt down in a great fire, we have put up here for a while. Thus, Mr. Kyung found that his name was not Shan. That evening they spent in laughing and talking together, and Kong remained there for the night. In the morning, a lad came in to light the fire, and the young man, rising first, went into the private part of the house. Mr. Kyung was sitting up with the bed clothes still handling around him, when the lad looked in and said, Master's coming. So he jumped up with a start, and in came an old man with a silvery beard, who began to thank him, saying, I am very much obliged to you for your condescension in becoming my son's tutor. At present, he writes a villainous hand, and I can only hope you will not allow the ties of friendship to interfere with disciples. Thereupon, he presented Mr. Kyung with an embroidered suit of clothes, a sable hat, and a set of clothes and stockings, and when the latter had washed and dressed himself, he called for wine and food. Kyung could not make out what the values of the chairs and tables were made of. They were so very brightly colored and dazzling. By and by, when the wine was circulated several times, the old gentleman picked up his walking stick and took his leave. After breakfast, the young man handed in his theme, which turned out to be written in an archaic style. And not at all after the modern fashion of easy writing, Kyung asked him why he had done this. To which the young man replied that he did not contemplate competing at the public examinations. In the evening, they had another drinking bout, but it was agreed that there should be no more of it after the night. The young man then called the boy and told him to see if his father was asleep or not, adding that if he was, he might quietly summon Miss Perfume. The boy went off, first taking a guitar out of his very pretty suit, and in a few minutes he came a very nice looking young girl. The young man bade her play the Death of Shun, and seizing an ivory plectrum, she swept the chords, pouring forth a vocal melody of exquisite sweetness and pathos. He then gave her a goblet of wine to drink, and it was midnight before they parted. Next morning, they got up early and settled down to work. The young man proved an apt scholar. He could remember what he had once read, and at the end of 2 or 3 months had made astonishing progress. Then they agreed that every 5 days they would indulge in a symposium, and that Miss Perfume should always be of the party. One night, when the wine had gone into Kung's head, he seemed to be lost in a reverie, whereupon his young friend, who knew what the matter with him, said, "This girl has brought up by my father. I know you find it lonely, and I have long been looking out for a nice wife for you." "Let her only resemble Miss Perfume," said Kyung, "and she will do." "Your experience," said the young man, laughing, "is but limited, and consequently anything is a surprise to you. If Miss Perfume is your beau and ideal, why, it will not be difficult to satisfy you." Some 6 months had passed away when one day Mr. Kung took it into his head that he would like to go out for a stroll in the country. The entrance, however, was carefully closed, and on asking the reason, the young man told him that his father wished to receive no guests for fear of causing interruption to his studies. So Kyung thought no more about it, and by, when the heat of the summer came on, they moved their study to a pavilion in the garden. At this time, Mr. Kyung had a swelling on the chest about as big as a peach, which in a single night increased to the size of a bull. There he lay groaning in the pain, while his pupil waited upon him day and night. He slept badly and took hardly any food, and in a few days the place got so much worse that he could neither eat nor drink. The old gentleman also came in, and he and his son lamented over him together. When the young man said, "I was thinking last night that my sister, Chiao-no, would be able to cure Mr. Kung, and accordingly I sent over to my grandmother's asking her to come. She ought to be here by now." At that moment, a servant entered and announced Miss Chiao-no, who had come with her cousin. Having been at her aunt's house, her father and brother ran out to meet her, and then brought her in to see Mr. Kyung. When she was between 13 and 14 years old and had beautiful eyes with a very intelligent expression in them, and a most graceful figure besides. No sooner had Mr. Kyung beheld this lovely creature than he quite forgot to groan and began to brighten up, wherein the young man was saying, "This respected friend of mine is the same to me as a brother. Try, sister, to cure him." Miss Chiao-no immediately dismissed her blushes and, rolling up her long sleeves, approached the bed to feel his pulse. As she was grasping his wrist, Kyung became conscious of a perfume more delicate than that of the epidendrum. And then she laughed, saying, "This illness was to be expected, for the heart is touched. Though it is severe, a cure can be effected. But as there's already a swelling, not without using the knife." Then she drew from her arm a golden bracelet, which she pressed down upon the suffering spot, upon until by degree the swelling rose within the bracelet and overtopped it by an inch and more, and overlaying parts that were inflamed, also passing under and thus very considerably reducing the extent of the tumor. With one hand she opened her robe and took out a knife with an edge as keen as paper, and pressing the bracelet down all the time with the other, proceeded to cut lightly round near the root of the swelling. The dark blood gushed forth and stained the bed with the mat, but Mr. Kyung was delighted to be near such a beauty. Not only felt no pain, but would willingly have continued the operation, that she might sit by him a little longer. In a few moments, the whole thing was removed, and the place looked like the knot on a tree where the branch has been cut away. Here, Miss Chiao-no called water to wash the wound, and from between her lips she took a red pill as big as a bullet, which she laid upon the flesh, and after drawing the skin together, passed round and round the place. The first turn felt like the searing of a hot iron, the second like a gentle itching, and the third he experienced a sensation of lightness and coolness which penetrated into his very bones and marrow. The young lady had returned the pill to her mouth and said, "He is cured," hurrying away as fast as she could. Mr. Kyung jumped up to thank her and found that his complaint had quite disappeared. Her beauty, however, had made such an impression on him that his troubles were hardly at an end. From this moment, he gave up his books and took no interest in anything. The state of things was soon noticed by the young man, who said to him, "My brother, I have found a fine match for you." "Who is it to be?" asked Young. "Oh, one of the family," replied his friend. Thereupon Mr. Kyung remained some time lost in thought, and at length said, "Please don't." Then turning his face to the wall, he repeated these lines: "Speak not of lakes and streams to him who once had seen the sea. The clouds that circle Wu's peak are the only clouds for me." The young man guessed to whom he was alluding, and replied, "My father has a very high opinion of your talents, and would gladly receive you into the family. But that he has only one daughter, and she is much too young. My cousin, Ah Sheng, however, is 17 years old, and not at all a bad looking girl. If you doubt my words, you can wait in the veranda until she takes her daily walk in the garden, and thus judge for yourself." This Mr. Kyung acceded to, and accordingly saw Miss Chiao-no come out with a lovely girl, her black eyebrows beautifully arched, and her tiny feet encased in phoenix-shaped shoes, as like one another as they could be. He was, of course, delighted and begged the young man to arrange all preliminaries, and the very next day his friend came to tell him that the affair was finally settled. A portion of the house was given up to the bride and bridegroom, and the marriage was celebrated with plenty of music and hosts of guests, more like a fairy wedding than anything else. Mr. Kung was very happy and began to think that the position of paradise had been wrongfully laid down, until one day the young man came to him and said, for the trouble you have been at in teaching me. I shall ever remain your debtor. And present moment, the Shan family lawsuit has been brought to a termination, and they wish to resume possession of their house immediately. We therefore propose returning to Shenxi, and as it is unlikely that you and I will ever meet again, I feel very sorrowful at the prospect of parting. Mr. Kung replied that he would go too, but the young man advised him to return to his old home. This, he had observed, was no easy matter, upon which the young man said, "Don't let that trouble you. I see you safer there." By and by, his father came in with Mr. Kung's wife and presented Mr. Kyung with 100 ounces of gold. And then the young man gave the husband and wife each one of his hands to grasp, bidding them shut their eyes. The next instant, they were floating away in the air, with the wind whizzing in their ears. "In a little while," he said, "you have arrived." And opening his eyes, Kyung beheld his former home. Then he knew that the young man was not a human being. Joyfully, he knocked at the old door, and his mother was astonished to see him arrive with such a nice wife. They were all rejoicing together when he turned round and found that his friend had disappeared. His wife attended on her mother-in-law with great devotion and acquired a reputation both for virtue and beauty, which was spread round far and near. Some time passed, and then Mr. Kyung took his doctor's degree and was appointed governor of the Gao and Yengyan. He proceeded to his post with his wife only, the journey being too long for his mother, and by a son was born. Then he got into trouble by being too honest and official, and threw up his appointment, but had not the wherewithal to get home again. One day, when out hunting, he met a handsome young man riding on a nice horse, and seeing that he was staring very hard, looked closely at him. It was young Kyang-fu, who then drew bridle and fell to laughing and crying by turns. The young man then inviting Kyung to go along with him. They rode on together till they reached a village thickly shaded with trees so that the sun and sky were invisible overhead, and entered into a most elaborately decorated mansion, such as might belong to an old established family. Kung asked after Miss Chiao-no, that heard that she was married, also that his own mother-in-law was dead, at which tidings he was greatly moved. Next day, he went back and returned again with his wife. Chiao-no also joined them, and taking up Kyung's child, played with it, saying, "Your mother played us truant." Mr. Kyung did not forget to thank her for her former kindness to him, to which she replied, "You're a great man now." Though the wound has healed, hasn't you forgotten the pain yet? Her husband, too, came to pay his respects, returning with her on the following morning. One day, the young Kyung Fu seemed troubled in spirit and said to Mr. Kyung, "A great calamity is impending. Can you help us?" Mr. Kyung did not know what he was alluding to, but readily promised his assistance. The young man then ran out and summoned the whole family to worship in the ancestral hall, at which Mr. Kyung was alarmed and asked what it all meant. "You know," answered the young man, "I am not a man, but a fox. Today we shall be attacked by thunder. And if only you will aid us in our trouble, you may still hope to escape. If you are unwilling, take your child and go, that you may not be involved with us." Mr. Kyung protested he would live or die with them, and so the young man placed him with a sword at the door, bidding him remain quiet there in spite of all the thunder. He did it as he was told, and soon saw black clouds obscuring the light until it was all as dark as pitch. Looking round, he could see that the house had disappeared, and that his place was occupied by a huge mound and a bottomless pit. In the midst of his terror, a fearful peal was heard, which shook the very hills, accompanied by a violent wind and driving rain. Old trees were torn up, and Mr. Kyung became both dazed and deaf. Yet he stood firm until he saw in a dense black column of smoke and horrid things with a sharp beak, long claws with which it snatched someone from the hole. It was disappearing up with the smoke, and in an instant Kyung knew by her clothes and shoes that the victim was no other than Chiao-no. And instantly, jumping up, he struck the devil violently with his sword and cut it down. Immediately the mountains were riven, and as and a sharp peal of thunder laid Kyung dead upon the ground. Then the clouds cleared away, and Xiaonyo gradually came round to find Kyung dead at his feet. She burst out crying at the sight and declared that she would not live since Kyung had died for her. Kyung's wife also came out, and they bore the body inside. Xiaonyo then made Ah Sheng hold her husband's head, while her brother prized open his teeth with a hairpin, and she herself arranged his jaw. She next put a red pill into his mouth, and bending down, breathed into him. The pill went along with the curtain of air, and presently there was a gurgle in his throat, and he came round, and seeing all the family about him, he was disturbed as if waking from a dream. However, they were all united together, and fear gave place to joy. But Mr. Kyung objected to live in that out of the way place and proposed that they should return with him to his native village. To this, they were only too pleased to assent, all except Chiao No. And when Mr. Kyung invited her husband, Mr. Wu, as well, she said she feared her father and mother in law would not like to lose the children. They had tried all day to persuade her, but without success, when suddenly they rushed one of the Wu's family servants, dripping with perspiration and quite out of breath. They asked what was the matter, and the servant replied that the Wu family had been visited by a calamity on the very same day, and had everyone perished. Xiao Niu cried very bitterly at this, and could not be comforted. But now there was nothing to prevent them from all returning together. Mr. Kyung went into the city for a few days on business, and then they set to work packing up night and day. On arriving at their destination, separate apartments were allotted to young Mr. Hyung-fu, and these he kept carefully shut up, only opening the door to Mr. Kyung and his wife. Mr. Kung amused himself with the young man and then his sister, Xiao filling up the time with chess, wine, conversation, and good cheer, as if they had been one family. His little boy, Juan, grew up to be a handsome man with a fox like penchant for roaming about, and it was generally known that he was actually the son of a fox. Wow. That story was very long and it didn't have that much of a moral to it for some reason, right? Very odd tale. I kind of got lost a little bit towards the end there. Just I feel like I was just kind of like verbal vomiting a little bit of the reading there for a second. But super still interesting. I mean, again, you hear like the references to foxes. I feel like foxes are like a really mystical creature uh in a lot of these cultures. I wonder why that is. Is it just because of how shy they are when it comes to like meeting other people, that their survival instinct obviously is to like run away and stuff like that, but like I really wonder what the correlation to like myths and folk tales that is. Maybe they're considered tricksters because they would hunt like the chicken livestock and stuff like that. Maybe there was just like massive amounts of encounters with like villagers and shit. But they're also too small to be considered like fearful prey, I guess, in some ways. Hmm, I don't know. But I hope you enjoyed that tale. For the next one, we're gonna have magical arts. So I hope you guys are ready for that one. I'll try to do that one for tomorrow, or the next video if you're watching from YouTube. I will catch you guys all on the next one. Bye. Oh, also, there's gonna be some boxes that are gonna pop up here and here for the Grimm's fairy tales and the tales of horror. Go check those out. Like the videos that you like for the stories, because I might choose to animate some of those. So go take a look at some of those. They're good watches. And if you want to go like take a break or something, they're good little viewing. But I'll see you guys all later. Bye.